the present that should have stayed wrapped. Imagine receiving a Christmas gift and keeping it unopened for 40 years. Now imagine that the moment you finally unwrap it, you become a target for assassination. This is not fiction. This is the harrowing reality that Thomas Brennan, a retired CIA operative, faced in December 2023. For 4 decades, a small, innocuous package sat in his attic, gathering dust, holding secrets that powerful people wanted buried forever. Inside that box was evidence of crimes committed at the highest levels of American intelligence, proof of illegal arms trafficking, covert assassinations, and a conspiracy that reached into the very heart of the CIA. The moment Thomas tore open that wrapping paper, a dormant tracking device activated, sending a signal across encrypted channels, triggering what insiders call Protocol Winter, a kill order designed to eliminate anyone who knows too much. Within hours, trained operatives were mobilized. His phone was tapped. His every move surveilled. The agency he had devoted his life to now wanted him dead. But why would a Christmas present from 1983 carry such deadly consequences? What secrets were so explosive that they required a 4-decade contingency plan? And how does a 72-year-old retired spy outmaneuver the most sophisticated intelligence apparatus on Earth? The answers will shock you. They will make you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty, patriotism, and the true cost of keeping secrets. This is a story of espionage, betrayal, redemption, and a Christmas miracle that almost turned into a funeral. How did Thomas survive? What was really inside that package? And why did someone want him silenced after all these years? Stay with us as we unravel one of the most intense stories of survival and truth you will ever hear. Drop a comment below telling us where you're listening from. And don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. Thomas Brennan never imagined that his 72nd Christmas would become the most dangerous day of his life. Living in a modest craftsman-style home on the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina, Thomas had spent the last 15 years in quiet retirement. The Blue Ridge Mountains surrounded his property, offering the kind of peace that only comes after decades of living in constant danger. Asheville, with its vibrant art scene and progressive community, was a world away from the dark alleys of Moscow, the interrogation rooms of East Berlin, and the safe houses scattered across Cold War Europe. Thomas was born in 1951 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the son of a steel worker and a school teacher. He grew up in a working-class neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, where front doors stayed unlocked, and where patriotism wasn't just a word, it was a way of life. When he turned 22, fresh out of Georgetown University with a degree in international relations and fluency in Russian, he was recruited by the CIA. It was 1973, the height of the Cold War, and America needed young, intelligent men willing to disappear into the shadows. Thomas excelled. He was sharp, disciplined, and morally certain that he was fighting for the right side. By 1980, he was stationed in Moscow under diplomatic cover, tasked with cultivating sources within the Soviet military and intelligence apparatus. It was dangerous, exhilarating work. One mistake could mean torture, imprisonment, or death. But Thomas thrived in that environment. He was good at reading people, at knowing when to push and when to pull back, at building trust in a world where trust was the most valuable and rarest commodity. December 1983 was supposed to be Thomas's last Christmas in Moscow before his rotation back to Langley. The Cold War was entering a particularly tense phase. The Soviet Union had just shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007, killing all 269 passengers, including a U.S. congressman. Reagan had called the USSR an evil empire, and tensions between the superpowers were at a fever pitch. In this climate, Thomas was managing one of the CIA's most valuable assets, a source codenamed Yuri. Yuri was unlike any source Thomas had ever worked with. He was a mid-level officer in the GRU, Soviet military intelligence, but he had access to information far above his pay grade. He claimed to be motivated by ideology. He believed the Soviet system was corrupt and destined to collapse. But Thomas always suspected there was something more personal driving him. Yuri was careful, methodical, and paranoid. They met in carefully orchestrated scenarios: a crowded metro station, a public park during a snowstorm, once even in the bathroom of the Bolshoi Theater during intermission. On December 23, 1983, Yuri requested an emergency meeting. This was highly unusual and against protocol. They met in Gorky Park just after sunset, when the winter darkness provided cover and the cold kept most people indoors. Yuri looked more anxious than Thomas had ever seen him. His face was pale, his eyes darting around constantly. He handed Thomas a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "Do not open this now," Yuri said in Russian, his breath creating clouds in the freezing air. "In fact, do not open it at all. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But keep it safe. If something happens to me, if I disappear, then you will know what to do with it." Thomas tried to ask questions, but Yuri cut him off. "There are things happening, Thomas. Things inside your own agency. Things that will get us both killed if we are not careful. This," he gestured to the package, "is insurance. But it is also evidence. Promise me you will not open it unless you absolutely must." Thomas promised. He had learned long ago that in the intelligence business, sometimes you had to trust your sources even when nothing made sense. They parted ways, and Thomas never saw Yuri again. Within a week, word came through back channels that Yuri had been arrested. The official story was that he had been caught selling state secrets to the West. He was tried, convicted, and executed by firing squad in February 1984. Thomas returned to the United States in January 1984, the unopened package hidden in his personal effects. He told himself he would open it once he was safely back at Langley, once he could properly analyze whatever Yuri had given him. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was guilt over Yuri's death. Perhaps it was a subconscious sense that whatever was inside that package was dangerous beyond measure. Instead, Thomas filed a brief report about Yuri's arrest and death, mentioned that Yuri had given him materials for safekeeping, and then placed the package in his personal storage, where it sat untouched for months, then years, then decades. Thomas's career continued. He worked in counterintelligence, ran operations in Central America during the 1980s, and eventually took a desk job in the late 1990s before retiring in 2008 at the age of 57. With a full pension and a chest full of classified commendations he could never show anyone. He married once, briefly, in 1987. Her name was Rachel, a State Department analyst he met at a conference in Geneva. They divorced in 1992. The marriage had been doomed from the start. Thomas could never fully share his life with her. There were too many secrets, too many missions he couldn't talk about, too many nights he came home distant and unreachable. They had one child together, Emma, born in 1988. Emma was brilliant, headstrong, and frustrated by her father's emotional distance. She became a civil rights attorney, perhaps in rebellion against his career in intelligence. They spoke infrequently, usually just on holidays and birthdays. Thomas loved her deeply, but had never learned how to show it. This was his greatest regret, not the missions that went wrong, not the sources he had lost, but the relationship with his daughter that he had never managed to repair. In retirement, Thomas kept to himself. He read extensively, took long walks in the mountains, and occasionally consulted for private security firms. He never looked at the package from Yuri. It moved with him from apartment to apartment, from city to city, always packed away in a box labeled Moscow 1983 Personal Items, out of sight, out of mind. Until December 2023. The Christmas season had always been difficult for Thomas. It reminded him of his last days in Moscow, of Yuri's frightened face in Gorky Park, of the career and life choices that had left him isolated and alone at 72. This particular December, Thomas decided to finally clean out his attic. He was getting older, and the thought of leaving a mess for Emma to sort through after he died bothered him more than he cared to admit. That's when he found it. The package, wrapped exactly as it had been 40 years ago, the brown paper yellowed with age, the string brittle but intact. For a long moment, Thomas just stared at it. He could still hear Yuri's voice. Do not open it unless you absolutely must. But Yuri was long dead. The Cold War was over. The Soviet Union had collapsed. Whatever secrets were inside this package, surely they no longer mattered. Surely, after 40 years, it was safe to finally see what Yuri had considered so important. Thomas carried the package downstairs to his living room. He made himself a cup of coffee, sat in his favorite armchair by the fireplace, and with hands that trembled slightly from age or anticipation, he couldn't say, he cut the string and carefully unwrapped the brown paper. Inside was a wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, with Cyrillic letters burned into the lid. Thomas recognized it as the kind of decorative box sold in tourist shops in Moscow. He opened the lid. Inside, nestled in yellowed tissue paper, were several items. A small music box, ornately decorated in the traditional Russian style. 3 photographs showing men in suits shaking hands in what appeared to be a warehouse. Several rolls of microfilm. And a small electronic device about the size of a pager with a blinking red light that had just activated. Thomas's blood ran cold. He knew instantly what he was looking at. The device was a beacon, a tracking transmitter designed to activate when exposed to air after being sealed. It was old technology, but it was sending a signal, right now. To whom he didn't know. But he knew enough to understand that he had just made a catastrophic mistake. Within seconds, his survival instincts kicked in. Thomas grabbed the box, shoved everything back inside, and ran to his basement workshop. He placed the device inside a small Faraday cage he kept for testing electronics, a metal box that would block the signal. But it was too late. The damage was done. Somewhere, someone had received notification that the beacon had been activated, and whoever had set up this 40-year-old failsafe was about to come calling. Thomas sat in his basement, heart pounding, mind racing through possibilities. This wasn't just a gift. This was a dead man's switch. Yuri had been trying to protect evidence so damaging that someone had created a protocol to eliminate anyone who ever accessed it. And Thomas had just announced to the world that he had opened Pandora's box. He looked at the photographs more closely. The men in the suits, he didn't recognize all of them, but one face stood out. Gerald Morrison. Thomas knew that name. Morrison had been a high-ranking CIA officer in the 1980s, someone who had gone on to become deputy director before retiring in the late 1990s. What was he doing in a warehouse with men who looked distinctly like arms dealers? Thomas's phone rang. Unknown number. He stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Thomas Brennan, a voice he hadn't heard in decades. Cold, precise, and very much alive. "You've just activated something you shouldn't have. Protocol Winter is now in effect. You have 24 hours to surrender the materials and yourself for debriefing. If you run, we will find you. If you talk to anyone, we will know. This is not a negotiation. This is a courtesy notification." The line went dead. Thomas stood in his basement, the box of evidence in his hands, and realized that the life he had built in retirement was over. After 40 years, the ghosts of Moscow had finally come home, and they wanted blood. What would you do if your past suddenly became your death sentence? If you're hooked and want to see what happens next, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, leave a comment below, and share this story with someone who loves a good thriller. The stakes are about to get even higher, and you won't believe what Thomas discovers in the evidence Yuri left behind. Thomas didn't sleep that night. He sat in his basement, surrounded by decades of accumulated tools and electronics, systematically examining every item from Yuri's package while his mind raced through scenarios and contingencies. The CIA had given him 24 hours. That meant they were weighing their options, deciding whether to bring him in quietly or make him disappear permanently. The fact that they had called at all meant there was still a chance for negotiation, or they wanted to keep him stationary while they moved assets into position. The music box was exquisite. Russian craftsmanship from the late 19th century, hand-painted with winter scenes of troikas racing through snow-covered forests. Thomas carefully wound the mechanism. The tinkling melody of Silent Night filled his basement workshop, achingly beautiful and incongruous with his current situation. But the music box wasn't just decorative. After the song finished, Thomas examined it more closely and found a small hidden compartment in the base. Inside was a handwritten note in Russian in Yuri's careful script. Thomas translated as he read, "If you are reading this, then I am already dead, and you are in grave danger." The photographs show Operation Driftwood, C.I. operation that I discovered by accident in 1982. Your agency, my dear friend, was using Soviet weapons captured in Afghanistan to arm Contra rebels in Nicaragua. But they were also selling weapons to other parties, drug cartels in Colombia, right-wing death squads in El Salvador, and even back to Soviet-aligned forces who were willing to pay premium prices. The men in these photographs are CIA officers, arms dealers, and cartel representatives. The microfilm contains shipping manifests, bank account numbers, and recorded conversations. This is not just illegal. This is treason. This is your government funding both sides of conflicts for profit. The tracking device I have included will activate when the package is opened. This was the only way I could think to protect you. If someone has the kill protocols in place, then the opening of this package will force them to act, and in acting, they will expose themselves. You now have proof of what they did. Use it wisely. Trust no one inside the agency. And forgive me for making you the keeper of such terrible knowledge. May God protect you. Yuri Mikhailovich Volkov. Thomas read the note 3 times, each word sinking in like lead weights. Operation Driftwood. He had never heard of it, which meant it was deeply compartmentalized, known only to a handful of people at the highest levels. If Yuri's evidence was genuine, and Thomas had no reason to doubt it, then this was explosive beyond measure. This wasn't just a scandal. This was the kind of revelation that could bring down careers, lead to prosecutions, and fundamentally damage public trust in American intelligence institutions. He examined the photographs with a magnifying glass. 3 black-and-white images, slightly grainy, taken with a telephoto lens from a distance. The first showed 4 men standing in what appeared to be a warehouse, surrounded by wooden crates, stenciled with Cyrillic letters. The second showed money-changing hand stacks of cash being counted on a table. The third showed the same men loading crates onto a truck. Thomas recognized 2 of the men definitely: Gerald Morrison, who had been CIA deputy director, and Marcus Delacroix, a French arms dealer who had been suspected of trading with terrorist organizations but never prosecuted. The other 2 men were less clear, but one appeared to be Latin American, possibly Colombian, and the other had the build and bearing of former military. The microfilm was more challenging. Thomas no longer had access to a microfilm reader, and the technology was obsolete. He would need to find someone who could digitize the contents without asking too many questions. That was a problem for later, assuming he survived the next 24 hours. Thomas's phone buzzed. A text message from Emma. "Dad, are you okay? Someone called my office asking about you. Said they were from your old job. What's going on?" Ice flooded Thomas's veins. They were already moving against him, and now they were involving Emma. This was a classic pressure tactic. Let the target know that his loved ones are vulnerable. Make him understand that resistance will bring consequences not just for him, but for everyone he cares about. He typed back, "Everything's fine. Wrong number probably. Love you." He knew she wouldn't believe him, but he hoped she would have the sense not to push. Emma was smart. She would recognize evasion when she saw it. Thomas made a decision. He couldn't stay in Asheville. The house was compromised. They would come for him, probably within hours. He needed to run, but more importantly, he needed to get the evidence somewhere safe and find people who could help him make sense of Protocol Winter. Thomas had maintained contact with only 2 people from his CIA days, Margaret Chen and David O'Brien. Margaret had been a technical officer, one of the best cryptographers and signals intelligence analysts the agency had ever employed. She had retired to Seattle in 2010 and now ran a cybersecurity consulting firm. David had been a field operative like Thomas, specializing in Eastern European operations. He had left the CIA under murky circumstances in 2005 and was last known to be living in Boston, running a private investigation firm. If anyone could help Thomas understand what he was facing, it was these 2. But reaching out to them would put them in danger as well. Was he willing to do that? Thomas thought about Emma, about the life he had tried to build in retirement, about the peace he had finally started to feel after decades of looking over his shoulder. All of it was gone now. Not because of anything he had done, but because 40 years ago he had been handed evidence of crimes committed by his own government, and now someone had decided it was time to clean up loose ends. He packed quickly and efficiently. A go-bag he had maintained out of old habit, cash, 3 fake IDs from his operational days that were probably still usable, encrypted flash drives, a burner phone, and a Glock 19 that he had kept despite never expecting to need it again. He made digital copies of the photographs using a high-resolution scanner and uploaded them to an encrypted cloud service using a VPN and Tor browser. The microfilm and the original materials went into a waterproof case. At 3 in the morning, Thomas slipped out of his house through the back door, cutting through the woods that bordered his property. He had left lights on timers to create the illusion of occupancy. By dawn, he was 3 hours away, driving a 15-year-old Honda Civic he had purchased years ago with cash and registered under one of his false identities. The car was nondescript, mechanically sound, and perfect for staying under the radar. As he drove north on Interstate 26, Thomas kept the radio off and his mind sharp, watching for surveillance. Every car could be a tail. Every overhead traffic camera a potential tracking point. He was 72 years old, but the old skills came back like muscle memory. Vary your speed. Take unexpected exits. Use visual markers to check if anyone follows your movements. Most people couldn't tail someone for more than 20 minutes without being spotted if the target knew what to look for. By noon, Thomas was in Charleston, South Carolina. He found a motel that still accepted cash and didn't ask too many questions. In his room, he used the burner phone to call Margaret Chen's personal number, not her business line, but a number he knew she kept for emergencies. She answered on the third ring. "This is Margaret. Maggie, it's Thomas Brennan. I need help." There was a long pause. Then, "Thomas." "My God, it's been, 15 years? What's wrong? I've activated something." "Protocol Winter. Does that name mean anything to you?" Another pause, longer this time. When Margaret spoke again, her voice was different, harder, more focused. "Where are you?" "Charleston." "But I'm not staying long. Don't tell me where you're going." Listen to me carefully. Protocol Winter is a termination protocol created in the mid-1980s. It was designed to eliminate sources and officers who had knowledge of compartmentalized operations that could never be officially acknowledged. The protocol was supposed to have been deactivated when the Cold War ended, but if it's been triggered, that means someone at a very high level decided to keep it operational. Thomas, who else knows about this? No one yet. But they've already contacted my daughter's office. "Maggie, I need to know who's running this protocol and how to stop it." You can't stop it from the outside. Protocols like this have fail-safes and redundancies. The only way to shut it down is to go to someone with the authority to override it, and that means someone very senior in the agency. But here's the problem. If Protocol Winter has been activated, it's because someone very senior wants it activated. You're caught in a circular trap. Thomas leaned against the motel room wall, feeling the weight of his situation. Yuri gave me evidence. Evidence of illegal operations. Arms trafficking, funding cartels, the whole nightmare. If I go public, can that protect me? Maybe, but it would also make you an even bigger target. You'd be threatening not just individuals, but the institution itself. Thomas, you need to think very carefully about your next move. Going public might keep you alive, but it will also make you a pariah. Everything you ever worked for, everyone you ever served with, they'll call you a traitor. Yuri called it Operation Driftwood. Have you ever heard of it? Margaret's sharp intake of breath told Thomas everything he needed to know. Oh God, Thomas. Driftwood. I saw references to it once, years ago, in some archived signals traffic. I never dug deeper because I was told explicitly to leave it alone. If that's what you've got evidence of, you're not just dealing with a few rogue officers. You're dealing with something that goes to the very top of the institutional memory of the CIA. People have died to keep Driftwood buried. Then what do? You find every other person who was involved and you band together. Safety in numbers. If they're activating Protocol Winter for you, they might be activating it for everyone who knew about Driftwood. Find them before the protocol does. And Thomas? Trust no one who's still inside the agency. This is coming from the top. Thomas ended the call and immediately destroyed the SIM card. He now had confirmation of what he had suspected. This wasn't about national security. This was about covering up crimes. And if Protocol Winter was being activated for everyone connected to Operation Driftwood, then he wasn't the only target. He needed to find David O'Brien. But first, he needed to understand exactly what was on those microfilms. Thomas couldn't digitize them himself without specialized equipment, but he knew someone who could, an old friend from his Georgetown days, who ran an archival preservation company in Richmond, Virginia. It was a risk, but a calculated one. As Thomas prepared to leave Charleston, he received another text on his regular phone. This one made his heart stop. "Mr. Brennan, my name is Emma Harrison, and I'm an investigative journalist with the Washington Post. I've been researching Cold War CIA operations, and I believe you may have information about Operation Driftwood. I'd like to speak with you. This is my direct number. Please call me at your earliest convenience." Thomas stared at the message. It could be legitimate, or it could be a trap. Journalists didn't typically have access to the names of covert CIA officers, even retired ones, unless someone had leaked his name deliberately. Unless this was part of the protocol, flush him out by making him think he had a way to go public safely. But what if it was real? What if someone else was already investigating Driftwood? That could change everything. Thomas made a decision. He would go to Richmond, digitize the microfilm, and then he would make contact with this journalist, but on his terms, in a public place with contingencies in place. As he pulled out of the motel parking lot, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Not by surveillance teams, his tradecraft told him he was clean, but by something else. By history itself. By the ghosts of decisions made decades ago by men who never imagined they would be held accountable. What secrets are worth killing for after 40 years? What would you do if you held evidence that could bring down powerful people, but using it might cost you everything? Drop a comment and let me know your thoughts on what Thomas should do next. The story is just getting started, and trust me, you won't believe what's hidden on those microfilms. Richmond, Virginia, greeted Thomas with cold rain and heavy traffic. It was December 27th, 2 days after he had opened Yuri's package, and Thomas was operating on minimal sleep, high-grade coffee, and the kind of adrenaline that only comes from knowing trained killers might be tracking your every move. He had driven through the night, taking a deliberately circuitous route through back roads and small towns, constantly checking for surveillance, switching vehicles twice, using cars from long-term airport parking lots, a trick he had learned decades ago, and one that still worked surprisingly well in the age of automated license plate readers. Richmond was a city that understood history and secrets. As the former capital of the Confederacy, it carried the weight of America's complicated past in its architecture and monuments. Thomas found a certain irony in seeking help here to expose secrets that the nation's intelligence establishment wanted buried. Perhaps this city, more than most, understood that history always demanded a reckoning eventually. His contact was Leonard Graves, a 70-year-old archivist and preservation specialist who ran a small but highly respected company called Temporal Preservation Services. Leonard and Thomas had been roommates at Georgetown in the early 1970s. While Thomas had gone into intelligence, Leonard had pursued his passion for historical preservation, eventually becoming one of the nation's foremost experts in recovering and digitizing deteriorating documents, photographs, and microfilm. If anyone could safely extract the information from Yuri's 40-year-old microfilm without damaging it, it was Leonard. They met at Leonard's workshop, a converted warehouse in Richmond's Shockoe Bottom district. The area had gentrified significantly in recent years, but Leonard's building retained its industrial character: brick walls, high ceilings with exposed beams, and small windows that could be easily secured. Perfect for Thomas's purposes. Leonard opened the door wearing his usual uniform, tweed jacket, bow tie, and thick-framed glasses that made him look like a character from a 1950s university film. His face broke into a genuine smile when he saw Thomas, though the smile faded quickly when he registered his old friend's expression. "Thomas, my God, you look like you've aged 10 years since I saw you at our class reunion. What's happened?" "Leonard, I need your help. And I need you to not ask too many questions. Can you still work with microfilm from the 1980s? Leonard's expression shifted from concern to professional curiosity. Of course. Cold War-era Soviet microfilm, if I had to guess from the quality and the time period you're referencing. Come in. Let's see what you've got. Thomas entered the workshop, which was filled with specialized equipment, temperature and humidity-controlled cabinets, high-resolution scanners, microscopes, and computers with software for restoring damaged images. Leonard locked the door behind them and drew the blinds. "Leonard, before I show you this, you need to understand something. What I'm about to share with you could put you in danger. If you want me to leave right now, I'll understand completely." Leonard removed his glasses and cleaned them methodically, a habit Thomas remembered from their college days. It was what Leonard did when he was thinking deeply about something. "Thomas, we've known each other for over 50 years. In all that time, you've never asked me for help with anything related to your work. If you're here now, it means whatever you're carrying is extraordinarily important and extraordinarily dangerous. I'm an old man who's spent his life with documents and the dead past. If I can help you bring truth to light, then I'm not going to walk away from that. Show me what you've got." Thomas laid out the 3 rolls of microfilm on Leonard's workstation. Under bright LED lighting, they could see that the film was in remarkably good condition, thanks to Yuri's careful preservation. Leonard examined each roll with a jeweler's loupe, noting the manufacturer marks and film stock. "Soviet military-grade archival microfilm. This is excellent quality. Whoever photographed these documents knew what they were doing. Give me about 3 hours, and I'll have everything digitized in high resolution. We can review it together." While Leonard worked, Thomas sat in the small office adjacent to the workshop, using an encrypted laptop to research Protocol Winter more deeply. What Margaret had told him confirmed his worst suspicions, but he needed more detail. Using various intelligence community databases, he still had access to through back channels and old login credentials that hadn't been properly deactivated. Thomas began piecing together a disturbing picture. Protocol Winter had been created in 1984, this same year. Yuri was executed by a small group within the CIA's counterintelligence division. Its official purpose, according to classified documents Thomas managed to access, was to provide a rapid response mechanism for dealing with compromised sources or officers who might be subject to Soviet blackmail or coercion. In practice, it was an assassination and evidence destruction protocol. If activated, it would mobilize a small team of contractors, not official CIA employees, who would neutralize the target and secure any compromising materials. What made Protocol Winter particularly insidious was its autonomy. Once activated, it ran on automatic protocols. It didn't require ongoing authorization or oversight. It was designed this way deliberately to insulate senior leadership from direct knowledge of assassinations. Plausible deniability taken to its logical extreme. Thomas found references to 7 individuals who had been designated as Protocol Winter assets in an 1984. He recognized 3 of the names: himself, Margaret Chun, and David O'Brien. The other 4 were names he didn't immediately recognize, but a bit more research revealed they had all been CIA officers or contractors involved in Central American operations during the early to mid-1980s. Most chilling of all, Thomas found brief notes indicating that Protocol Winter had been activated 3 times in the past 6 months. 3 of the original 7 designated assets had died. Robert Kellerman in July, supposedly from a heart attack while hiking in Colorado. Patricia Dunmore in September, in a single-car accident on a rainy night in Maryland. And James Harding in November, from a home invasion gone wrong in Florida. Thomas felt ice in his veins. This wasn't paranoia. This was systematic elimination. Someone had decided that everyone connected to Operation Driftwood needed to be silenced permanently. That left only 4: Thomas himself, Margaret Chen, David O'Brien, and someone named Catherine Reeves. His phone buzzed, the burner phone. A text from a number he didn't recognize. "Thomas, this is David O'Brien. I know you're in trouble. So we need to meet. They've already killed 3 of us. We're next unless we work together. Meet me in Boston, Fenway Park, tomorrow at noon. Come alone. Trust no one else." D.O. Thomas stared at the message. It could be legitimate. David was smart enough to track him down if he put his mind to it. Or it could be a trap, someone using David's name to lure him into the open. Before he could decide how to respond, Leonard called from the workshop. "Thomas, you need to see this. Right now." Thomas entered the workshop to find Leonard standing in front of his largest computer monitor, his face pale and expression grave. On the screen were dozens of documents, spreadsheets, and photographs, all digitized from Yuri's microfilm. "Thomas, what exactly were you involved in during the 1980s? "I was a case officer in Moscow. I ran sources. Why?" Leonard gestured to the screen. "Because what you've brought me isn't just evidence of illegal arms sales. This is documentation of a systematic operation to fund covert wars using drug money and illegal weapons trafficking. Look at this." The spreadsheet showed transactions running into hundreds of millions of dollars. Bank account numbers in Panama, the Cayman Islands, and Switzerland. Dates, amounts, and cryptic descriptions: Nicaragua delivery, Colombia payment, Afghan surplus, Salvador package. But the photographs were even more damning. Image after image showing meetings between CIA officers and known criminals. One showed Gerald Morrison standing beside Pablo Escobar, the infamous Colombian drug lord. Another showed a warehouse in Panama filled with weapons still in Soviet military packaging. A third showed American military advisors training what appeared to be death squads in El Salvador. Leonard, can you authenticate these? Can you prove they're real and not fabricated? Leonard nodded slowly. The microfilm itself is authentic Soviet stock from the early 1980s. The developing process and the image degradation patterns are consistent with that time period. These weren't created recently and backdated. These are genuine photographs from 40 years ago. As for the documents, I'd need to have paper analysts and forensic experts examine them, but based on what I'm seeing, I believe they're real. Thomas, this is the kind of evidence that could lead to criminal prosecutions even 40 years later. There's no statute of limitations on some of these crimes. Thomas sat down heavily in Leonard's office chair. Operation Driftwood. That's what it was called. The CIA was using profits from cocaine trafficking and illegal arms sales to fund operations that Congress had explicitly prohibited. They were dealing with cartels, dictators, terrorists, anyone who would pay. And they used Soviet weapons captured in Afghanistan to maintain plausible deniability. What are you going to do with this information? I'm going to expose it. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what was done in the name of national security. But first, I need to stay alive long enough to do it. Can you make multiple copies of everything? Store them in different locations? If something happens to me, I need this information to survive. Leonard was already nodding. I'll encrypt the files and distribute them across multiple secure servers. I'll also make physical copies and place them with trusted colleagues in the archival community with instructions to release them if you don't check in regularly. Thomas, you understand what you're taking on, right? You're not just fighting against a few bad actors. You're challenging the institution itself. I know. But if I don't do this, then Yuri died for nothing. And 3 more people have been murdered in the last 6 months just to keep this secret buried. I won't let that stand. Thomas's regular phone rang. The display showed Emma's number. He answered, keeping his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Emma, sweetheart. Dad, what the hell is going on? 2 men came to my apartment this morning. They showed federal badges and said they needed to speak with you urgently. They asked if I knew where you were, if you'd contacted me, if you'd mentioned anything about traveling. Dad, they weren't asking. They were interrogating me. I'm a civil rights attorney. I know what an intimidation tactic looks like. What have you gotten yourself into? Thomas closed his eyes. This was exactly what he had feared. They were using Emma to pressure him, to flush him out. Emma, listen to me very carefully. Those men were not there to help me. I've uncovered something from my old work, something that powerful people want buried. I can't tell you more than that, because the less you know, the safer you are. But I need you to do something for me. What? I need you to go stay with your mother for a few days. Tell her it's a holiday visit. Don't mention this conversation to anyone. And Emma, if those men come back, you tell them you haven't heard from me and you have no idea where I am. Can you do that? There was a long silence. Then, Dad, you're scaring me. I know, honey, and I'm sorry. But I promise you, I'm trying to do the right thing. I just need a few days to make sure the truth gets out. Then this will all be over. The truth about what? About things that should never have been done in the first place. I love you, Emma. Stay safe. He ended the call before she could protest further. His heart ached. He had spent so much of Emma's life absent, emotionally distant, locked away behind the walls he'd built to survive his career. And now, when he was finally trying to do something unambiguously right, he had to push her away again for her own safety. Leonard had been listening quietly. "Thomas, you have a daughter?" "Yes, she's 35, a civil rights attorney." "Smart, principled, everything I should have been." Thomas stood up, squaring his shoulders. "Leonard, I need to go to Boston. I need to find David O'Brien and figure out who else is still alive from the original list. And I need to make contact with this journalist from the Washington Post. But first, I need you to show me how to access those encrypted files you're creating. If something happens to me, I need to be able to send them to multiple people simultaneously." Leonard spent the next hour teaching Thomas how to use a dead man switch, a digital system that would automatically distribute the files to journalists, congressional oversight committees, and human rights organizations if Thomas failed to check in within a specified time period. It was insurance, but insurance that came with a price. If Thomas died, the truth would come out, but it would also destroy whatever remained of the CIA's institutional credibility. By the time Thomas left Richmond, it was late afternoon. He had copies of all the digitized files on 3 encrypted flash drives, memorized access codes for the cloud storage where Leonard had backed everything up, and a clear plan. Get to Boston, find David O'Brien, locate Catherine Reeves, and build a coalition of survivors who could corroborate each other's testimony. Then go public with everything. But as Thomas drove north on Interstate 95, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something. Why had Protocol Winter been activated now after 40 years? What had triggered the decision to eliminate everyone connected to Operation Driftwood? The answer came to him as he crossed into Maryland. Elections. The United States was in the middle of a presidential election cycle. Several of the candidates had promised to declassify old CIA operations to increase transparency and accountability. If Operation Driftwood was declassified, the evidence would surface. The conspiracy would be exposed, unless everyone who knew about it was already dead. This wasn't just about covering up old crimes. This was about preventing those crimes from becoming election issues. This was about protecting people who were still alive, still powerful, and still very much invested in keeping the past buried. Thomas pulled into a rest stop and used his laptop to research current CIA leadership. And there, in the biography of the current Director of National Intelligence, he found exactly what he was looking for: Gerald Morrison. The man from the photographs, the man who had shaken hands with Pablo Escobar, the man who had orchestrated Operation Driftwood. He hadn't retired in the late 1990s. He had moved up. He had become one of the most powerful intelligence officials in the country. And from that position, he had the authority to activate Protocol Winter. Thomas had his answer. Morrison wasn't just covering up crimes, he was covering up his own involvement. If the truth about Operation Driftwood came out, Morrison would face prosecution for treason, drug trafficking, arms dealing, and conspiracy to commit murder. His career, his legacy, his freedom, all of it would be destroyed. That's why the protocol had been activated. That's why 3 people were already dead. And that's why Thomas needed to move faster than he ever had before. He sent an encrypted message to Margaret Chen. Morrison is running Protocol Winter. He's the one who created Driftwood. We need to expose him before he kills us all. Are you safe? The reply came within minutes. I'm secure, but they've been probing my systems. Someone very sophisticated is trying to hack my company's servers. I've set up additional security, but Thomas, I don't know how long I can hold them off. If you're going to do something, do it soon." Thomas sent another message, this time to the number that had claimed to be David O'Brien. "Fenway Park, noon tomorrow. I'll be there. But if this is a setup, know that everything I have will be released automatically if I don't check in." No response. That worried him. Finally, he composed a message to Emma Harrison, the journalist from the Washington Post. "Miss Harrison, my name is Thomas Brennan. I have evidence of a covert CIA operation from the 1980s called Operation Driftwood. This operation involved illegal arms trafficking, drug money, and conspiracy to commit murder. Multiple people have been killed in recent months to keep this secret buried. I'm willing to meet with you and provide evidence, but it needs to be on my terms and in a secure location. If you're genuinely investigating this story, respond with the name of your editor at the Post so I can verify your credentials." The response came faster than Thomas expected. "Mr. Brennan, my editor is Sandra Kowalski, National Security Desk. I've been investigating Cold War operations for 2 years. I've heard rumors about Driftwood, but never had concrete evidence. If you're willing to go on record, I can guarantee you protection through publication. We have lawyers who specialize in whistleblower cases. Please call me at this number when you're ready to talk." Thomas verified the information. Sandra Kowalski was indeed the national security editor at the Post, and Emma Harrison was a legitimate investigative journalist with a track record of breaking intelligence community stories. It seemed genuine. But Thomas had been in the intelligence business long enough to know that things that seemed genuine often weren't. He would meet with her, but only after he had talked to David and secured additional insurance. As night fell and Thomas continued his drive toward Boston, he thought about Yuri, about that last meeting in Gorky Park, about the fear in his friend's eyes, about the package that had sat unopened for 40 years. Yuri had known he was going to die. He had known that exposing Operation Driftwood would cost him his life. But he had done it anyway because he believed the truth mattered more than safety. Thomas was 72 years old. He had lived a long life, most of it in service to his country. If this was how it ended, trying to expose the corruption at the heart of the institution he had devoted himself to, then so be it. Better to die standing up for the truth than to live in comfortable silence while murderers got away with their crimes. As he passed the signs for Baltimore, Thomas made himself a promise. He would finish what Yuri had started. He would make sure Operation Driftwood saw the light of day. He would expose Gerald Morrison and everyone who had participated in those crimes. And he would do it in a way that protected Emma and gave the victims, all the people who had died because of Driftwood, from Central American villagers to his fellow CIA officers, some measure of justice. The Christmas gift that was never opened had finally revealed its secrets. And those secrets were about to change everything. Thank you so much for staying with this story until this point. I'm incredibly grateful that you're here, and I promise you, the best is yet to come. The next chapter will reveal shocking betrayals and a confrontation that will determine whether Thomas survives to tell his story. Don't go anywhere. Boston welcomed Thomas with the kind of bitter cold that cut through even the heaviest winter coat. It was December 28th, just before noon, and Fenway Park stood silent and snow-covered, its famous green monster obscured by winter weather. The baseball stadium was closed for the season, but the area around it remained a busy commercial district with restaurants, bars, and shops catering to tourists and locals alike. Thomas arrived an hour early and positioned himself at a coffee shop across from the park's entrance, where he could observe everyone approaching without being conspicuous. He wore a heavy parka, a wool cap pulled low, and sunglasses despite the overcast sky. Basic disguise techniques that still work surprisingly well. He ordered a black coffee and took a window seat, his eyes constantly scanning for threats. At 11:45, he spotted David O'Brien approaching from the Kenmore Square direction. Thomas recognized him immediately, despite the 15 years since they'd last seen each other. David was 68 now, his hair completely white, his face weathered and lined, but he still moved with the careful awareness of a man trained to detect surveillance. He wore a charcoal wool overcoat and carried a leather messenger bag. David entered the coffee shop, ordered an espresso, and sat down at Thomas's table without acknowledging him verbally. For a full minute, neither man spoke. They just watched each other, two old spies trying to determine if this reunion was genuine or a trap. Finally, David said in a low voice, "You look like hell, Thomas. You look pretty rough yourself." "How did you find me?" "I didn't. I found Leonard Graves. I knew if you needed technical help with anything historical, you'd go to him. We go back a long way too. He called me after you left Richmond and said you might try to reach out." Thomas nodded slowly. That made sense. It was good tradecraft on David's part. "3 of us are dead, I know. Kellerman, Dunmore, and Harding. All within 6 months. All made to look like accidents or random violence. I didn't connect the dots until I received a visit from 2 men claiming to be from the Inspector General's office 2 weeks ago. They wanted to talk about my time in Central America during the 1980s. Specifically, they wanted to know if I had any documents or materials from that period. That's when I knew Protocol Winter was active again. It's Gerald Morrison. He's the Director of National Intelligence now. He was the architect of Operation Driftwood, and he's eliminating everyone who could testify against him. David's face darkened. Morrison. That son of a bitch. I always suspected he was dirty, but I never had proof. What do you have? Thomas glanced around the coffee shop. Too exposed. Not here. Is there somewhere we can talk privately? David nodded. I've got a secure location about 20 minutes from here. My office. It's swept regularly for bugs, and it's in a building with good sight lines and multiple exits. Follow me there. We'll take separate vehicles in case one of us is being tailed. 20 minutes later, Thomas was in David's office, a converted loft in Boston's Seaport District. The space was minimalist and functional. A large desk with multiple computer monitors, filing cabinets that looked to be fireproof and reinforced, and windows that had been treated with privacy film. On the walls were framed photographs from David's career, black and white images of Berlin, Prague, Warsaw, and other Eastern European cities. David locked the door and activated a white noise generator. Okay, we're secure. Show me what you've got. Thomas laid out everything. The photographs, the digitized documents from the microfilm, the spreadsheets showing financial transactions, and the evidence of Gerald Morrison's direct involvement in Operation Driftwood. David studied each item carefully, his expression growing grimmer with each revelation. Jesus Christ, Thomas, this is worse than I thought. I knew we were running weapons to the Contras using questionable funding sources, but I didn't know it was this systematic. And I certainly didn't know Morrison was dealing directly with the cartels. David looked up from the documents. This is enough to bring him down. This is enough to bring down half the leadership of the CIA from that era. But it's also enough to get us both killed, which is why we need to go public. Immediately. I've made contact with a journalist from the Washington Post. I'm meeting with her tomorrow. If we provide her with this evidence and go on record, we'll have protection through publication. They can't kill all of us once the story breaks without making it obvious that it is an institutional cover-up. David was silent for a long moment, staring at the photographs. Then he said, "There's something you need to know, something I've never told anyone. I wasn't just peripherally involved in Driftwood. I was one of Morrison's couriers. I moved cash from the weapons sales to the bank accounts in Panama. I didn't know at the time that the money was coming from cocaine trafficking. I thought we were just using black budget funds, but I was complicit. If this comes out, Thomas, I'll be prosecuted too. I could spend the rest of my life in prison." Thomas studied his old friend's face. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm tired of carrying it. Because 3 of our colleagues are dead and we're probably next. And because even if it means I go to jail, I'd rather die knowing I tried to make it right than die running from it. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything I know. But Thomas, we need more than just the 2 of us. We need Catherine Reeves. Who is she?" "I saw her name on the protocol winter list, but I don't remember her. She was Morrison's deputy during Driftwood. She handled the logistics, the shipping manifests, the route planning, the payoffs to foreign officials. If anyone knows where all the bodies are buried, it's Catherine. But she's been underground for 20 years. Last I heard, she was living under an assumed name somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. Can you find her?" David nodded. "I've kept tabs on all of us over the years, old habits. She's in Port Townsend, Washington, running a bookstore under the name Sarah Mitchell. But Thomas, if we bring her into this, we're putting a target on her back too. Are you willing to do that? We don't have a choice. They're killing us anyway. At least this way we fight back." As they discussed strategy for contacting Catherine, Thomas's burner phone buzzed. A text from Margaret Chun. "Thomas, my servers have been breached. They got past my security. I don't know what they accessed. You need to assume they know everything you told me. Change all your plans. They'll be waiting for you at any scheduled meeting." Thomas showed the message to David. Damn it. If they've compromised Margaret's systems, they might know about my meeting with the journalist tomorrow. Then we move up the timeline. We contact the Post tonight, we give them everything, and we go on record immediately. Once the story is filed, we're safer. But before Thomas could respond, the windows of David's office exploded inward. Glass shattered across the room as 2 objects crashed through smoke grenades. Within seconds, the loft was filled with thick, choking smoke. Thomas dove behind the desk, his old training taking over. He heard boots on the stairs, at least 4 sets. Professional assault team. They weren't here to arrest anyone. This was a hit. David had pulled a gun from his desk drawer, a Sig Sauer P226. He fired 3 rounds toward the door, not to hit anyone but to slow their entry. "Thomas, back exit. Go." Thomas grabbed his messenger bag with the flash drives and scrambled toward the emergency exit at the back of the loft. Behind him, he heard David engaging the assault team. More gunfire, shouting, then a sound that made Thomas's blood run cold. David's voice cut off mid-curse. Thomas burst through the emergency exit onto a fire escape. Below him, He could see a black SUV idling in the alley, the extraction vehicle for the assault team. He couldn't go down. He went up, climbing toward the roof. Behind him, he heard boots on the fire escape. They were following. Thomas reached the roof and ran, his 72-year-old legs protesting every step. He vaulted over the gap between buildings, a 4-foot jump that would have been nothing 40 years ago, but now nearly cost him his balance. A voice behind him shouted, "Federal agents. Stop or we'll shoot." But Thomas knew they weren't federal agents. Federal agents didn't throw smoke grenades into private offices. Federal agents didn't execute people. These were Morrison's contractors, the Protocol Winter Team. Thomas reached the edge of the building. Below him, 7 stories down, was an alley. No way to jump. Nowhere to go. He turned to face his pursuers, 2 men in tactical gear, both armed with suppressed pistols. The lead man approached slowly, his weapon trained on Thomas's center mass. Thomas Brennan. "You've caused a lot of trouble. Director Morrison sends his regards. Nothing personal. Just business." Thomas held up his hands in surrender. But his right hand held his phone, and his thumb was on the biometric scanner. With one press, he activated the dead man switch Leonard had set up. Every file, every document, every photograph, it was all being uploaded simultaneously to 36 recipients: journalists, congressional staffers, human rights organizations, and international news agencies. "It's already done," Thomas said calmly. "Everything I have is being distributed right now. You can kill me, but it won't stop the truth from coming out." The lead contractor hesitated. He touched his earpiece, listening to someone giving him instructions. His expression changed from confidence to uncertainty. Then Thomas heard the most beautiful sound in the world: police sirens. Multiple vehicles, approaching fast. Someone had called 911 about the gunfire. The contractors looked at each other, then back at Thomas. The lead man said, "This isn't over. Morrison has reach everywhere. You can run, you can go public, but you'll never be safe. Never." They retreated across the rooftop and disappeared down another fire escape. Thomas slumped against the roof's edge, his heart hammering, adrenaline making his hands shake. He had survived. But David. Thomas made his way back down to the loft. The assault team had fled before the police arrived, but they'd left destruction in their wake. The office was wrecked. And David O'Brien lay on the floor in a pool of blood, 2 gunshot wounds to the chest. Thomas knelt beside his old friend. David was still alive, barely. His eyes found Thomas's face. Did you send it? It's done. Everything's out there now. You did it, David. You got your chance to make it right." David smiled weakly. "Good. Tell them ... tell them I'm sorry." "For all of it, I will." David O'Brien died 30 seconds before the first Boston police officers arrived. Thomas was arrested at the scene, held for questioning, and released 6 hours later when his lawyer arranged by Emma, who had ignored his instructions to stay away, provided documentation that Thomas had been defending himself against an assault. But by the time Thomas walked out of Boston Police Headquarters, the story had already broken. The Washington Post had published the first article. Explosive evidence reveals decades-old CIA operation involving drug trafficking and illegal arms sales. Other news agencies were picking it up. Congressional leaders were calling for investigations. And Gerald Morrison had submitted his resignation as Director of National Intelligence. Thomas stood on the steps of the police station, watching the news on his phone, and felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Yuri's evidence had finally seen the light of day. David had gotten his redemption. And the truth, the terrible, complicated, messy truth, was finally out there for the world to judge. But the story wasn't over yet. There was still Catherine Reeves to find, still testimonies to give, still justice to pursue. And Thomas had one more thing he needed to do: reconcile with Emma. We're almost at the end of this incredible journey. If you've made it this far, I know you're invested in seeing how this story concludes. Please stay with me until the very end to see how Thomas finally finds peace and what happens to those who tried to silence him. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button and leave a like. We have more incredible stories coming that you won't want to miss. The finale is coming up next, and it will give you the closure and justice the story deserves. 3 months had passed since that violent day in Boston. It was now late March, and the cherry blossoms were beginning to bloom around Washington, D.C. Nature's way of announcing that winter was finally over and renewal was possible. Thomas sat in a conference room at the Rayburn House office building, waiting to testify before a special congressional committee investigating Operation Driftwood and the broader issue of unaccountable covert operations. The past 90 days had been a whirlwind. The initial Washington Post article had exploded into a national scandal. Gerald Morrison had been arrested and charged with conspiracy, racketeering, obstruction of justice, and multiple counts of murder for hire related to the Protocol winter killings. 17 other current and former CIA officials had been implicated. The agency itself was under unprecedented scrutiny, with calls for comprehensive reform coming from both political parties. Margaret Chen had survived the hack on her systems and was now serving as a technical consultant to the congressional investigation. Catherine Reeves had been located in Port Townsend and, after initial reluctance, had agreed to cooperate fully with investigators. Her testimony had been devastating. She provided documentation of not just Operation Driftwood, but of 3 other similar programs that had operated throughout the 1980s and 1990s. But the cost had been high. David O'Brien had died on that rooftop in Boston. His funeral had been attended by hundreds of former intelligence officers, many of whom had privately thanked Thomas for exposing the corruption that had tainted their service. Thomas had delivered the eulogy, making sure everyone knew that David had chosen redemption over silence, courage over complicity. The media attention had been intense and often uncomfortable. Thomas had given dozens of interviews, always careful to emphasize that his motivation wasn't to damage the CIA, but to restore its integrity. He wanted to make clear that most intelligence officers served honorably, that the problem wasn't the institution itself, but the lack of accountability that had allowed programs like Driftwood to exist in the shadows. Through it all, Emma had been by his side. Their relationship, so distant for so many years, had begun to heal. Emma had taken a leave of absence from her law firm to serve as Thomas's advocate and advisor. They had long conversations about his career, about the choices he had made, about the secrets he had kept. It was painful, but it was necessary. For the first time in decades, Thomas was being completely honest with his daughter, and she was beginning to understand the complicated man her father had been. Now, as Thomas prepared to give his testimony, Emma sat in the gallery behind him, along with Margaret and Catherine. Also present was Leonard Graves, who had provided crucial authentication of the evidence. And sitting in the front row was a woman Thomas had never met in person, but whose reporting had been instrumental in bringing the truth to light. Emma Harrison from the Washington Post. The committee chairman, Representative Michael Torres from California, called the hearing to order. Mr. Brennan, thank you for appearing before this committee voluntarily and for your cooperation with our investigation. I want to begin by acknowledging the courage it took to come forward with this evidence, knowing that doing so would put your life at risk. The American people owe you a debt of gratitude. Thomas adjusted the microphone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, but I want to be clear, I'm not a hero. I kept this evidence hidden for 40 years. 3 of my colleagues died because I didn't act sooner. If anyone deserves recognition, it's Yuri Volkov, the Soviet intelligence officer who risked and ultimately gave his life to expose these crimes, and David O'Brien, who died defending the truth. I'm just trying to finish what they started. For the next 4 hours, Thomas walked the committee through everything. His recruitment of Yuri, the final meeting in Gorky Park, the unopened Christmas present, the contents of the package, the activation of Protocol Winter, and the systematic elimination of witnesses. He provided documentation, answered questions, and made recommendations for reform. The most emotional moment came when Representative Sarah Kim from New York asked, Mr. Brennan, knowing what you know now, what would you say to young people considering careers in intelligence? Thomas paused, choosing his words carefully. I would say that intelligence work is essential to national security. We need dedicated, intelligent, ethical people to protect this country from genuine threats. But I would also say that blind loyalty to any institution is dangerous. Your first loyalty must be to the Constitution and to the truth. If you see something wrong, even if it's being done by people you respect, even if speaking up could cost you your career, you have an obligation to act. Silence in the face of wrongdoing isn't loyalty, it's complicity. I wish I had learned that lesson 40 years ago. Maybe I could have saved lives. Maybe I could have prevented the suffering that Operation Driftwood caused in Central America. That's a regret I'll carry for the rest of my life. The hearing concluded at 6 p.m. As Thomas left the witness table, he was surrounded by reporters, cameras, and questions. But Emma was there, guiding him through the crowd, protecting him the way he had always wanted to protect her, but never quite managed. Outside the building, in the soft light of early spring evening, Thomas found Margaret and Catherine waiting. Margaret pulled him into a tight hug. You did it, Thomas. You really did it. Catherine, more reserved, nodded with respect. Yuri would be proud. We all would have been safer if we'd done this decades ago, but better late than never. What will you do now? Thomas asked her. Go back to my bookstore. Try to live whatever years I have left in peace. Maybe write a memoir, though I suspect no one will believe half of it. She smiled sadly. And you? I'm not sure yet. Try to be a better father. Maybe teach some university, might let a washed-up spy lecture on ethics and intelligence. Mostly, I just want to sleep without wondering if tonight's the night someone comes to kill me. They said their goodbyes, and Thomas and Emma walked together toward his hotel. It was a beautiful evening, warm for March, with cherry blossoms floating on the breeze like snow. Washington, D.C. was at its most beautiful in this season, a city built on ideals and compromises, on grand visions and human failures, now reckoning with uncomfortable truths about its past. Dad, Emma said as they walked, I need to ask you something. Do you regret your career? All those years in the CIA, do you wish you'd done something else? Thomas thought about it for a long time. No, despite everything, no. I believed in the work. I believed I was protecting people, keeping them safe, and most of the time I was. Most intelligence work is tedious, methodical, and unglamorous. It's analysts poring over satellite imagery. It's officers meeting sources and collecting information that helps policymakers make informed decisions. It's genuine patriots doing necessary work. My regret isn't the career itself. It's that I stayed silent when I saw the work being corrupted. That's what I wish I could change. They reached the hotel, but before going inside, Thomas stopped and turned to face his daughter. Emma, there's something I need to say. I was a terrible father. I was absent, emotionally distant, incapable of showing you how much I loved you. I let my work consume me, and I justified it by telling myself I was protecting you. But the truth is, I was just protecting myself from vulnerability, from connection, from the risk of letting someone really know me. You deserved better. I'm sorry. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Dad, let me finish. These past 3 months, working with you, talking to you, really being present with you, it's been the best time of my life. Better than any operation I ever ran. Better than any commendation I ever received. You're brilliant, compassionate, and brave. You're everything I should have been. And I want whatever time I have left to be about building a real relationship with you. If you'll let me. Emma hugged him tightly, and Thomas held his daughter the way he should have done 1,000 times throughout her childhood. They stood there on the sidewalk in Washington, D.C., two people who had been strangers for too long, finally finding their way back to each other. There's someone I want you to meet, Emma said when they finally separated. I've been seeing someone. Her name is Rachel, and she's a public defender. I think you'd like her. And Dad, we're thinking about starting a family. Through surrogacy or adoption, we haven't decided yet. But I want my kids to know their grandfather. The real him, not the distant figure I grew up with. Thomas felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Pure, uncomplicated joy. I would love that. I would love that more than anything. They went inside, and Thomas spent the evening having dinner with Emma and Rachel, talking about the future instead of the past, making plans and sharing stories. It was the kind of normal, mundane, beautiful family moment that Thomas had sacrificed throughout his career without fully understanding what he was giving up. Later that night, back in his hotel room, Thomas received an encrypted email from Leonard Graves. It contained one additional piece of information that hadn't been included in the congressional testimony or the media coverage. Leonard had found something in the metadata of the microfilm evidence that Yuri Volkov hadn't been executed in 1984. He had been exfiltrated by a faction within the KGB that had been sympathetic to reform. He had lived in hiding for years, surviving the collapse of the Soviet Union, and had died of natural causes in 2019 at the age of 83 in a small village in rural Russia. The email included a photograph taken in 2015, showing an elderly man with white hair and kind eyes standing in front of a modest cottage, holding a music box, the same kind of ornate Russian music box that had been in the Christmas package. Leonard had also included a translation of Yuri's final letter, written shortly before his death. To my friend Thomas Brennan, if this ever reaches you, I hope you open the package. I hope you found the courage to expose the truth, even though I know what it would cost you. I survived, Thomas. They told me I was dead, gave me a new identity, and I lived a quiet life far from the gains of empires and the machinery of intelligence. I had a wife, children, grandchildren. I taught literature at a small university. I read poetry and tended a garden. It was a good life. But I never forgot that December night in Gorky Park, or the promise I extracted from you, or the hope that someday, somehow, the truth about Driftwood would emerge. If you're reading this, then you kept that promise. Thank you, my friend. Thank you for being brave when I could not be. May you find the peace that I found in these quiet years. May you know that your courage mattered. Yuri. Thomas sat in his hotel room, looking at the photograph of his old friend, tears streaming down his face. Yuri had survived. He had lived. He had found happiness. And he had trusted Thomas to eventually do the right thing. The Christmas gift that was never opened had finally revealed all its secrets. And those secrets, terrible as they were, had led to truth, to justice, and to the possibility of redemption. Thomas opened his laptop and began to write. Not a report, not testimony, but a memoir. He would tell the whole story, his recruitment, his career, his failures and regrets, the truth about Operation Driftwood, and the lesson he had learned too late, that secrets, even those kept for the best of reasons, always extract a price. That institutions, no matter how essential, must be held accountable. That silence in the face of wrongdoing is itself a form of wrong, and that it's never too late to choose truth over complicity, courage over comfort. Outside his window, Washington, D.C. slept, the monuments and buildings illuminated against the night sky. A city of power and principle, of ideals and compromises, of people trying their best to navigate impossible moral terrain. Thomas had spent his life serving that city, that country. And now, in what he hoped would be the final chapter of that service, he was helping to ensure that future generations might do better than his had. The story ended not with violence or tragedy, but with the quiet promise of a better tomorrow. With a father and daughter reconnecting, with truth finally confronting power, with an old spy finding peace in the simple act of telling the truth. That Christmas present from 1983, unopened for 40 years, had contained more than evidence of crimes. It had contained a test. Would Thomas have the courage to do what was right, even when it cost him everything? In the end, he had passed that test. It had taken 40 years, cost lives, and nearly destroyed him. But he had passed. And as Thomas wrote late into the night, his fingers moving across the keyboard, he heard, whether in memory or in his soul, the faint tinkling sound of a Russian music box playing Silent Night. A promise finally kept, a truth finally told. Thank you for joining us on this intense journey through espionage, betrayal, and redemption. The story of Thomas Brennan reminds us that courage isn't about being fearless, it's about doing what's right, even when you're terrified. It's about choosing truth over convenience and principle over self-preservation. What did you think of this story? Did Thomas do the right thing by exposing Operation Driftwood? Would you have had the courage to open that Christmas present? We want to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling us what you thought of this story, your name, and what city and state you're watching from. Your engagement helps us continue to bring you these powerful stories. If you enjoyed this tale of espionage and redemption, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next story. We have more incredible narratives coming soon that will keep you on the edge of your seat. And don't go anywhere just yet. We have another amazing story appearing on your screen right now that you absolutely need to watch. Click on it and continue this journey with us. Thank you for being part of our community. Your support means everything, and we can't wait to share more unforgettable stories with you. Until next time, remember, the truth always finds a way to surface, no matter how long it's been buried. The end.